In the heart of a dense forest, on a tiny scrap of land thrown up from the ocean depths, lives a fabulous old man, a centuries-old tree that stopped reproducing years ago. In its native land, this towering giant is known as the Ironwood Tree. Without this individual, the species would exist only in the form of relics, withered leaves and stems in the yellowed pages of a herbarium. According to legend, the Ironwood Tree was once placed under an evil spell, condemned to live out its days without reproducing. Its entire species engaged in a struggle for life, only the strongest managed to survive. This tree with the unique destiny is the tambalacock. Today, the last surviving tambalacocks are entrenched at the bottom of a deep valley in an earthly paradise off the east coast of Africa, the island of Mauritius. A tiny dot in the Indian Ocean, Mauritius is roughly 1,865 square kilometers, or 2/3 the size of Rhode Island. This ancient volcano risen from the abyss is a spectacular natural laboratory of evolution, a promised land for all vegetation that sets out to conquer it. 5 million years ago, ocean currents and cyclonic winds carried pioneering seeds from Africa and Madagascar. Once on dry land, they immediately took root in the fertile soil. Then, driven by an insatiable appetite for conquest, they began to spread out and evolve into new species, endemic species found nowhere else in the world. To admire the tambalacock, you must navigate steep cliffs. Brave walls of centuries guarding the forest with sharp-tipped spears, and clear a path through a maze of tangled leaves and branches. And when the song of the echo parakeet is heard above the jungle floor, the tambalacock appears. Towering above the ground, yet solidly anchored in the earth. Majestic, with a thick, straight trunk soaring 20 meters into the air, its leaves tough enough to resist howling winds, pelting rain, and tropical sun. One day, a fateful meeting took place in this modern-day Garden of Eden, a face-to-face encounter between the tambalacock and an inquisitive visitor that forever changed its destiny. In 1973, a young American scientist explores the undergrowth of the Mauritian forest. With every step he takes, the winds of discovery, rustling the branches and leaves of dozens of exotic species, sweep over the young biologist. He does not know it yet, but in contemplating the beauty of this island, Stanley Temple is about to unearth a strange secret from the island's almost forgotten past. During a trek along the gorges of Black River, Temple's attention is drawn to an unexpected sight. An incongruous element out of keeping with the lush Mauritian landscape. In a small clearing, Temple spots a tree, the only one of its kind in the area. Intrigued by its isolation, he identifies its genus and species. The tree is a tambalacock, a member of the cider oxylon family. Sure that he will discover more a little further on, Temple continues his hike. But many kilometers later, he has still found only 13 trees.
When I went to the forest to look for tambalacock trees, I visited all of the trees that were known to the foresters at that time, as well as a few additional trees that I discovered quite incidentally to my fieldwork. Some of them were obviously on their last legs. They were very over-mature trees that had many dead limbs and looked as though they were probably not long for the world. Some of the other trees were in very good shape, looked very vigorous, very, very healthy. They were all fairly large trees, though. They were all mature trees. They were all hundreds of years old.
All of the tambalacocks on the island are elderly, and many are in poor shape. There are no saplings among them. For Temple, this indicates the species is already extinct. In search of proof, he returns to the forest. One by one, he examines each tree. Everything appears normal. There are no signs of parasites on the bark and no structural problems with the trunks. Yet, he is struck by an observation that is so natural, so obvious, it has taken a while to register.
Almost every one of the trees produced fruit, so there was no problem of producing sometimes a very abundant crop of seeds. Some of the trees were actually very prolific.
How can a species disappear when it is producing fruit? As he collects the seeds at the foot of the trees, Temple expects to discover at least a few seedlings. But all he finds are these tough-looking nuts.
In fact, it's rather interesting when you look at the distribution of the tambalacock in the area immediately around the trees that I examined. There was no evidence of young tambalacock trees in the immediate area where seeds must have been falling for many, many years, given the age of those trees.
No predators, a favorable environment. The island of Mauritius is an ecological niche for many plant species, and they all thrive here. All except the tambalacock. Why has this tree stopped reproducing? What has made it sterile? The inquiry will be long and difficult. For a plant to germinate, all it takes sometimes is the splash of a raindrop, or a puff of wind wafting the seed toward new horizons. Over the millennia, to conquer new territory and ensure their long-term survival, plants have become warriors. All have developed formidable strategies. In this merciless war, the most opportunistic plants use animals to transport their seeds considerable distances. Extending their territory is a natural impulse for all living things. In a race to dominate where humans, along with ants, are the frontrunners, plants are no laggards. To eliminate competitors, they can be ruthless, as is the case with the water hyacinth, which appears to be unstoppable. Some travel thousands of kilometers using a system of hooks and barbs, allowing them to hitch rides with birds. But nature is complex. In the plant kingdom, there are still species that have not yet revealed their secrets. Are there other trees like that? Like the tambalacock on the island of Mauritius, which are quietly slipping away with no clue as to the reason for their departure? Shortly after his discovery, Temple assesses the age of the trees he's found in the forest. They are all about 300 years old. He still wonders why there are no young Tambalacocs in the undergrowth, when their seeds are strewn all over the ground. Clearly, something must have happened. More than 3 centuries ago, a dramatic event must have occurred that jeopardized the future of the Ironwood tree. The scientist must unravel the mystery. At first, Temple suspects some kind of calamity, a devastating catastrophe that uprooted all the young Tambalacocs, leaving only the sturdier adults. Storms, hurricanes, cyclones. At the Mauritius Weather Center, warning signs of all such events are carefully monitored. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, meteorologists collect data relayed by the Indian Ocean weather stations. For the past 20 years, Yarusan Budu, the center's deputy director, has tracked the progress of cyclones. Their movements are well known to him.
We have about 10 tropical storms every year during our summer season. Sometimes it varies, it can go up to 12 or 13, but normally in a mean it's about 10. And some trees, especially those which take hundreds of years to mature, they can disappear, because if cyclones come at a regular frequency, with a regular frequency, they can cause considerable damage, and to such an extent that even the trees can disappear.
Among the cyclones recorded between 1615 and 1970, there were several devastating storms. But as powerful as they were, they never provoked the massive destruction of trees as strong as the Tambalacocs. On the contrary, cyclones benefit this species, since they disperse pollen and promote the dropping of fruit. So that theory is rejected. Other catastrophes provoked by humans are then considered. For example, the growing of sugarcane has wreaked havoc with the natural environment. Over the past 3 centuries, its extensive cultivation has pushed the tree line up 700 meters. Unmolested for centuries, the Central Plateau forests, the final refuge of the Tambalacocs, have all suffered severe deforestation. Still, the majority of these trees grow in such inaccessible regions, they are of no interest to the sugar industry. The theory that the species was driven to extinction by the destruction of its environment is thus also rejected. Guided by his intuition, Temple sets out in search of new theories. The Tambalacoc seed, a sphere 4 to 5 centimeters in diameter, doubtlessly holds the key to the puzzle. A closer examination reveals the seed is enclosed in a very hard coat. So hard it appears nothing can pierce it, even a germinating sprout. Temple subjects the seed to several tests. But even after being soaked in water and planted in wet compost, the seed does not germinate.
I knew right from the beginning, before I even knew what the tree was, that this was an unusual sort of botanical phenomenon for something to have a seed coat that tough, that thick, that hard. Usually implied that it was developed as a protection for the seed that was enclosed inside. And remembering my botany courses from university, quite often the seed is trying to protect itself from being damaged, often by an animal that might eat the seed.
The mystery deepens. Mauritius is home to no animal large enough to consume the fruit of the tambalacock. So why would the plant produce a seed so tough it cannot fulfill its reproductive function? Temple is not about to give up. With slow but resolute steps, he makes his way to the Mauritius Institute in Port Louis, the island's capital. He is determined to unearth the event that jeopardized the future of the Ironwood Tree. And it is here, by consulting the island's historical archives, that the American scientist makes an extraordinary discovery. The beginning of the tree's decline coincides exactly with the disappearance of another species. For the Dutch, the island of Mauritius offered a reserve of fresh food for ships engaged in the spice trade. In 1598, settlements began to grow, but instead of cultivating this new land, Temple discovers they systematically pillaged it. During the early 1680s, the last representative of a rare bird found nowhere else in the world was killed, the Mauritius dodo. Hunted for its meat, this large, flightless bird was slaughtered without mercy.
It was probably at about that point, especially the fact that that there was a temporal relationship, at least, between those seeds and the dodo, that I started to think about the mutualism hypothesis, that perhaps these seeds actually benefited from the presence of the dodo.
When he begins a new painting, ornithologist Franz Staub likes to set up his canvas outdoors. He sees clearly in his mind's eye the subject he plans to paint, for he knows by heart the characteristics of the bird that disappeared at the same time the tambalacock stopped reproducing. But could Temple once again be barking up the wrong tree? The relationship between the extinction of this bird and the decline of the tambalacock could be no more than a coincidence. With its tiny wings, short, stubby legs, and blunt body, the dodo is a perfect example of several million years of insular evolution. Staub's sketch is progressing well, as is the inquiry of the American biologist.
Then I discovered there had actually been some well-preserved seeds that had come out of a marsh that had also yielded dodo bones. And one of the things that was quite interesting about those seeds was that they were much smaller because they had been abraded. The seeds had lost many of their surface features and had been reduced very much in size, some of them probably to half of their original size.
Could the fate of the tambalacock really have been so closely linked to that of this large, clumsy bird? Twice a week, in his quest to unveil the secret ties that sometimes unite plants and animals, biologist John Morimutu crosses the turquoise waters of a lagoon on the northern tip of Mauritius. His destination? Île aux Aigrettes, a tiny island on the edge of the coral reef. This tiny dot of land is a refuge, an experimental botanical garden where a team of scientists works to revive dying species.
We are restoring the island to as close a possible state as it would have been when people first came to Mauritius in the 16th century. So this involves the control of invasive weeds and the replanting of the areas that we control the invasive weeds in with native species.
Here, John oversees the progress of the ebony tree, an endemic species that, like the tambalacock, has almost disappeared from the Mauritian forests.
Hi, Rebecca. Okay.
Hello.
How's it going?
Yeah, not bad. Oh well. Nearly done with the third subplot.
Oh, brilliant. So one more to do.
Yeah.
That'll take you, what, about 2 weeks, you reckon?
Yeah, probably about 2 weeks then.
Any interesting findings over the last few days?
Yeah, so far we found some pseudoacacia seeds in the feces, and we also discovered an ebony seedling growing out of.
For Rebecca Weaver and Catherine Brown, this seedling represents the spirit of conquest, pushing the ebony tree to use every available means to disperse its seeds over the widest possible range. Meanwhile, Stanley Temple pursues his theory at the Museum of Natural History in Port Louis. Temple claims the dodo possessed an astonishing physical ability. He believes this now extinct bird was able to swallow very hard seeds and grind them down to ease their passage through its digestive system. By the time the seeds were excreted, they were soft enough to germinate. Now all he has to do is prove it. To support his hypothesis, Temple carries out an unusual experiment.
After I had become more and more interested in the possibility of the mutualism with the dodo, my next-door neighbor acquired a turkey that was intended for Christmas dinner, and the turkey lived right outside my bedroom window. And I had a very difficult relationship with this turkey, so turkeys were on my mind frequently. And it just dawned on me one day that this very large turkey might actually be an adequate surrogate for a dodo.
The extremely greedy turkey has a highly efficient digestive system. The secret to its digestive prowess is a very specific organ. That organ is its gizzard. To process all the food they ingest, many large birds fill the gizzard with pebbles. With the help of these natural crushing instruments, which pulverize their food, they can digest just about anything. This includes not only seeds, but also twigs and clumps of earth. A large adult turkey should be able to digest seeds as hard as those of the tambalacock, then excrete them, abraded and softened by the stones in its gizzard. Thanks to this efficient gastric action, the seeds should then germinate much more easily.
The experiment actually involved force feeding the turkey some seeds. And I selected some seeds from a tree in the forest that were much smaller than many of the other seeds were. It was easier to get them down the turkey's throat.
A few days after stuffing his turkey with about 20 seeds, Temple finds about 7 of them in the bird's excrement. To determine the contribution of this flightless fowl to seeds unable to germinate on their own, he plants them. Three months later, Temple has the results of his experiment. 3 Tambalacock seedlings have germinated with the help of an outside agent, the turkey. Seemingly irrefutable proof of his theory. Back on Îles aux Aigrettes, biologist Rebecca Weaver and zoologist Catherine Brown are working with a new sample plot.
So here's a female ebony tree, and wow, just look at all those seedlings directly under it.
Yeah.
I think basically the seedlings stop as far out as the canopy goes, so you can see there's virtually no dispersal at all.
Yeah.
Let's go see if we can find any ebony seedlings that are a significant distance away from the parent plant.
Over time, the ebony has developed another strategy to quickly cover as much territory as possible, outpacing rival species.
Oh, there's an ebony seedling just here, and it's not directly beneath the parent plant.
I think there's one over there.
Oh yeah. It's quite a distance away, isn't it?
So you take this end and go to the edge of the canopy of that female ebony tree there.
To determine the range of seed dispersal, they measure the distance separating the ebony seedling from its parent plant.
Okay, does that look straight from your end? Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'm at the edge of the canopy now.
All right. Is it in a straight line? Okay. I've got the point marked.
Okay.
The ebony tree is about 30 meters from its offspring. To cover this distance, the tree employed the services of a mercenary, a transporter that carried the seed along with it on its travels. Here he is, an Aldebrad giant tortoise, a land turtle weighing about 250 kilograms, and one of only 18 species not driven to extinction by the early settlers. To disperse its seeds, the ebony employs the digestive tract of the tortoise. In return, the animal snacks on its pulpy fruit. It's a win-win situation, each one benefiting from the exchange. This seems like another good example of mutualism. But in the case of these two species, it's not quite that simple.
When people use the word mutualism to explain the link between, for example, the ebony and the giant tortoises, it conjures up an image of 100% dependence, which clearly is not the case completely, because we could see regeneration of ebony even without tortoises. However, it does seem they do need a disperser, a large frugivore, to disperse these fruits.
But on Îles aux Aigrettes, the tortoises disperse more than just ebony seeds. In their excrement, the two young scientists have already found more than a dozen different kinds of seeds.
Oh, there's a seed in this one.
That's a scavola seed.
These opportunistic rival species have also gone along for the ride, tucked away in the turtle's digestive tract. In addition, the animal's powerful gastric juices rid many seeds of harmful bacteria that could hinder their germination. But with the dodo, the tambalacock went a step further.
In the case of the dodo, we had a very unusual seed predator, one that clearly through its evolutionary history on the island had been getting larger and larger and larger. Clearly, if the tambalacock and perhaps other trees on the island as well were to cope with the increased efficiency of this seed predator, they were almost required in an evolutionary sense to develop some kind of a defense mechanism. And the hypothesis is that the tambalacock did that by making a seed that was tough enough to withstand the dodo's digestive tract and the powerful gizzard, but in doing that may have developed such a tough seed that it became very difficult for the seed to germinate without having received that battering in the dodo's gizzard.
3 centuries after the dodo's disappearance, the tambalacock has finally revealed its secret. Other giants will soon begin reaching for the sky under the benevolent eye of their majestic elders. "25 years have passed since Temple's extraordinary theory was published in major scientific journals. The story should have ended there, and yet, in just a few months, Vincent Florence has seemingly beaten all the odds. This young biologist has grown tambalacock seedlings in a nursery. What's so surprising about that? These trees germinated naturally, with no outside help, not from a dodo, a turkey, or any other animal. Why then is the tambalacock unable to reproduce in the wild? The mystery reappears, more inscrutable than ever. Florence is determined to reveal the tree's secret. This man could prove to be a valuable witness. Just before the arrival of Stanley Temple, Wahab Owadali, former director of the National Parks and Conservation Service, had begun to take an interest in the tambalacock seeds.
I collected a few seeds and planted them. That was back in 1971. I waited for months and months for them to germinate, but nothing happened. Then one day I saw a tiny seedling emerge from the earth. I was very happy, and I kept it. So that tree is a little more than 30 years old now.
A native of Mauritius, Owadali was never convinced by the dodo theory. He finds it too full of contradictions to be credible.
The dodo and the tambalacock did not occupy the same habitat, the same ecosystem. The dodo was a low-altitude bird, whereas the tambalacock is a high-altitude tree found on a plateau.
Owadali may hold the key to the mystery. He offers other more rational explanations for the scarcity of the tambalacock.
Monkeys, deer, and wild pigs destroy the tambalacock, and invasive forest species strangle the tree and prevent it from germinating because there's not enough light.
Since the island of Mauritius was first discovered, its vegetation has diversified considerably. Many exotic plants and animals have been introduced. These very aggressive competitors have managed to crowd out endemic species. The Chinese guava, for example. Introduced for fruit farming, it now chokes native forests, making it as hard for humans to make their way through its tangled branches as for indigenous plants to breathe. Could a plant such as this one have caused the extinction of the Tambalacock? Florence and botanist Jean-Claude Savation have spent hours in this maze searching for Tambalacocks. Their goal? To discover if the tree can grow in such a hostile environment.
Nothing very interesting here. Let's go on.
Hey, what's this?
This sapling may be a tambour tree.
Yes, nice tree's been snapped in a cyclone probably. It's shooting up again.
The tambour tree is almost as rare as the Tambalacock. Collecting this sample is a stroke of good luck for the two men. They hope that one day all indigenous species will regenerate naturally in the forest, despite the exotic weeds. But day after day, the aggressive aliens proliferate and isolate the endemic species. Divided and separated, they gradually weaken and die. What if the Tambalacock had scientists fooled from the start? While the Ironwood Tree was engaged in the fight to the death with its real enemy, perhaps scientists were off on a wild turkey chase? Back in Port Louis, there is still one more task to be performed. Identify the cutting taken from the forest. With its 3,000 plates, this herbarium is a veritable gold mine. A botanical Bible, it contains specimens of most Mauritian species. The tambour tree and the Tambalacock, of course, but also dozens of others that are becoming increasingly rare. It is indeed a branch from a tambour tree. In the solitude of his lab, Florence is assailed by doubts, but he is sure of one thing.
A lot of things been said, and very little has had any sort of scientific proof behind. So it seems that a lot of arguments have been put forth like this without having been observed. They were just hypothetical possibilities, and people have just gone in length in this and talk a lot about it, and these have become like reasons why the Tambalacock are not originating without really going into studying them, quantifying these factors, the importance of these factors.
Deforestation, damage inflicted by monkeys, bats, and deer, the disappearance of the giant tortoise, and of course, the extinction of the dodo. A dozen theories have been proposed to explain the scarcity of the Tambalacock. Satisfied by none of them, Vincent Florence and ecologist Claudia Bider renew their efforts to unravel the mystery. Step 1. Determine the number of viable seeds produced by the Tambalacock. Aiming to gather precise data concerning the germination of the Ironwood Tree, the two scientists collect more than 7,000 seeds. The preliminary results are revealing.
Food production is much lower in forests invaded by alien weeds. This means that, in fact, the mature trees are having their vitality reduced by this fierce competition with the exotic weeds. Our idea were like maybe the weeds caused a problem before seedlings were formed, and we looked at fruit production of the trees in two different constructed conditions. That is, the trees which are growing with the weeds and the trees compared to the trees which are growing without the weeds.
Step 2 is an in-depth study of the heart of a seed.
This one's empty. This one is alive, Claudia.
The Ecology Lab at the University of Mauritius. Determined to leave no stone unturned, Florence tests fragments of the Timbalakok seed. His goal is to test a hypothesis, or rather, eliminate one conclusively. Islands are home to far fewer parasites than mainland areas. For this reason, insular plants sometimes let their defenses down, giving imported animals and bacteria a strong advantage. Weakened chemical and mechanical defenses could have left the Timbalakok vulnerable to attacks from enemies invisible to the naked eye, such as fungi, for example.
The fungus can attack the seed of Timbalakok. I believe, however, that this attack takes place after the seed has started germinating, contrary to what you'll find in literature, where they say that before the seed splits, you have fungus destroying the seed there. But before that, the weeds are actually decreasing the vitality of the plants.
Finding no trace of fungi, Florence thinks he finally knows the culprit. He believes weeds have eliminated the Timbalakok as a viable species. To prove it, the biologist returns with his team to the forest. To quantify the impact of invaders on the health of the Timbalakok, they must count all the trees in areas dominated by exotic weeds. A daunting challenge, made even more so by false alarms.
So what is your... It's a sideroxylon, for sure. Have a look.
Oh, you're right. Sideroxylon cinerum. And I see it full of flowers and flower buds too. Have a look.
Yes, that's right. It's the cousin. It's not the Timbalakok. But I'm sure this habitat is perfect for the Timbalakok. Let's have a look around.
As they await the discovery of new trees, Vincent Florence and Claudia Bider continue their experiments. To test their ability to germinate, they plant several dozen seeds on the roof of their house. Before planting, each undergoes a different treatment. More or less abundant watering, for example, or various degrees of pit preparation.
That's it, they're all intact. This has started.
Their first observation, the germination rate of the Timbalakok is very low. Only one seed in 30 has emerged from its coat.
Just split. There's one germinating there. Look.
The scientists do get the occasional break, but the signs are clear. If the germination rate is so low under ideal conditions, how can a tree hope to reproduce in the wild, where it is choked by weeds?
It's germinating underneath the ground. 2 seeds germinating, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are not split. 8 intact and 2 germinating.
Vincent believes he is close to solving the mystery of the disappearing Timbalakok. He thinks competition for space is so intense among forest species, it can no longer regenerate naturally. Smothered by exotic weeds, it cannot reproduce. They return to the field a few days later.
Okay, that's our first tree for the day. That's definitely double cock. Yes, it's quite sick. I'll have a look around to see if there's some more.
"50 meters further on, the biologist spots another Timbalakuk. It too is surrounded by guava trees. A younger specimen, but just as sickly as the first. His suspicions are confirmed.
Okay, we found another one here. Down the path.
Just there.
A medium-sized tree. Yeah. The leaves a bit old.
The group immediately sets to work, gathering evidence.
.2. That's the circumference.
We're going to analyze if there's any difference between fruit produced by trees in some condition, like in the weeded area, compared to the non-weeded area. And we're going to map the population spatially to see if there's any kind of pattern emerging, whether the plants are clumped or randomly distributed. And this gives us some insight into the ecology, the dispersal of the seeds and things like that. If the tree is not regenerating properly, you would expect a gap in the younger, smaller, therefore smaller size classes of trees.
I'm taking GPS.
But to outsmart the intruders once and for all, Vincent needs irrefutable proof of his theory.
Estimation 12 meters.
Okay.
Good. Somewhere in this forest, the seedlings are germinating, but very rare. They are very, very rare, and they're very, very hard to find, and very low density. I would say if we find one seedling, that would be a feat. That would be very, very interesting by itself, because we have never seen any seedling of the Timbalakuk in the forest.
The search continues, but this time, the group enters an area where all invasive species have been eradicated. Suddenly, along a pathway,
Wow, look.
Wow.
See this is the Timbalakuk, the first seedling ever found in the wild.
Amazing, great.
It's exactly as what we have at home, what we are growing. Let's have a look if there's more around.
Hey.
Check the seed.
Yes.
The second one.
Wow.
There's another one here. The third one.
Wow.
Yes. Excellent.
these 3 seedlings cracked their coat with no outside help. Free from the crushing weight of invading species, they germinated with no problem. Without speeches or fanfare, the 3 scientists pay mute homage to the seedling by marking its birthplace. A few moments later, the ceremony concludes with the pinging of a GPS. Before the arrival of humans, this nameless island was foreign to all invasive species. While scientists advanced hypotheses concerning the fate of this tree, the ironwood was fighting a losing battle. Despite small victories and the emergence of a few seedlings, its fate was almost sealed. Ironically, although humans have destroyed many endemic species, they still have the power to renew life. Thanks to a handful of determined scientists, an ancient tree has regained its youth, the youth it lost far too soon.